Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
It's me, Egbert, once again. I'm the new owner of this station. I went out and hired the best talk radio consultant, Jeff Allen from News Talk STL, and told him to hire the worst talent he could find. Jeff did exactly as I told him. Ladies and gentlemen, here are Brad and John.
Wow. I don't know if that's good or bad.
I love it. I think any promo is good promo, Brad.
The worst talent. Okay, well, I guess we'll take that for what it's worth, right? The worst talent. I don't know. Anyway, this is Brad and John Show, BJ.show. I am Brad.
BJShow.co.
God, I did it again.
That's okay. We're getting there, Brad. Every repetition we get, we get better.
I have the old thing of BS show with Shelley. Okay. Excuse me. I don't know where that came from. Mark Reardon.
Yeah.
I sent him a link to the show yesterday because we talked about him for almost one entire break. And you know what his response was?
Thanks.
No.
He probably said, thanks.
No, he didn't. He said, I'm not going to listen to it. I never listen to anybody who talks about me.
Oh, wow. That's good. Well, that shows the respect he has for you, Brad.
Yeah, zero.
No, it does. That he will listen to it. You know, that he cares about your opinion.
He says he won't listen to it.
Oh, I missed that word.
Yes, he won't listen to it. He never listens to anything that anybody says about him. If somebody says, because he's always afraid, he says, I wonder if this is that quote. Here,
is he afraid that, like, critics will influence his show?
No, let me read the exact quote, you know. First off, we complimented him out the wazoo, correct?
Yeah.
And I told him, I said it's 95% complimentary and 5%. My whole thing was something he did I didn't like. No.
About McCloskey. That's
McCloskey, yeah, the fact. He called him a non-candidate, blah, 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 blah. Which, once again, let the voters decide. If the voters decide that Mark McCloskey got 3% of the state vote, then he is a non-issue. But when he's running for the office, it's not his job to declare someone a non-candidate. And my exact example of that was Donald Trump coming down the escalator in 2016 saying we're running for president. People, he's not going to be. He's just
so Mark says that he doesn't he doesn't want to hear either a review of him or feedback about his performance.
He says, I haven't listened to your clips. I don't really enjoy hearing myself being talked about.
Okay. Hey, that's his prerogative.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, that's all good. Okay, so he has Nick Schroyer, or however you pronounce his name, on
Nick
yesterday.
Schroyer, yep.
And Nick's talking about the fact that...
Is this yesterday?
Yeah, yesterday afternoon.
Okay.
And Nick's talking about, I'm thinking about that congressional 3rd district, and you know what? I understand that Ann Wagner is not going to run for re-election, so I may actually take a look at 2nd District because apparently where he's in 2nd District and not in 3rd District. And what's so funny about it is everybody who's pretty much announced that they're going to run for 3rd District, the Blaine Luetkemeyer seat, is not in the 3rd District, right?
And do you know the follow-up to Nick's interview?
Well, the follow-up is like 20 minutes later, Ann Wagner announces she's running for re-election.
Absolutely, that's right. Now, I don't know if they're correlated or not. I'm sure Ann had that statement ready because once Blaine starts talking about it, there was definitely social media chatter about it. And look, Ann Wagner is not spending her time scrolling through Twitter wondering what people are saying about her, but folks on her staff are. And they were like, look, we got to get something out about this or else people are going to start wondering if you're going to go.
Right. Well, see, here we go once again. I've never had any conversation, either positive or negative, with Nick Schroyer. He absolutely positively avoids me. If there's an event I'm at, if I go talk to him, I mean, literally, sometimes he'll see me come in and he'll walk away. And I'm going like, I don't quite understand what the deal with him is. I've never done anything bad to him, and
is it maybe because the other day you only had one eye, you said? You had a scratch cornea. Maybe he has an aversion to people with scratch corneas.
I mean, maybe he does. I don't know. I mean, the only problem I had, if you know the crazy, weird story, is that he was at one point in time when he was a state rep before he was a senator, he was being challenged by the fact that he didn't live in the district. You know that crazy story.
Yeah, the whole residency thing.
Right.
Yep.
And supposedly he was renting a basement from some woman in O'Fallon, and quite honestly, between you and me, the story sounded pretty flimsy to me. Because the thing about it was that he claimed that his kid was the reason he actually had a house that his wife and son or daughter or the rest of his family lived in down in Defiance, but he lived in a rented house. He lived in the basement of a house in O'Fallon. I'm going, okay, now hold on a minute. And the reason for that was he said he moved into the Francis Howell School District because they had a very special program that they didn't have in Fort Zumwalt. And I ran into Dr. Bernie Dubray, who just retired not too long ago, who was the superintendent for a long time at Fort Zumwalt. And I asked him point blank. One day I said, Bernie, I heard that, actually I didn't say Bernie, I said Dr. Dubray. Explain to me this situation with Nick Schroyer saying that the program that you don't have, they have in Francis Howell. And his response, normally Dr. Dubray is a very measured, diplomatic guy. He uttered a couple of four-letter words and said it was BS.
Yeah. Now, you would also expect, and just to play devil's advocate here, you would also expect that somebody who's been a long-time part of the education establishment might not be fond of a guy that generally pokes at the establishment.
Well, see, you deal with, this is your bread and butter. You deal with politicians all day long on a daily basis, okay?
Yeah.
To a certain extent, I do as well, too. Part of what I do is I come in contact with. As a matter of fact, I used to have one. We used to have the old talk station, which was, the Mouth, KWMO. We had Brian Nieves, who at the time was a state rep, and we had state senator. And the guy who got his start on radio was Brian.
I know who it is.
Nieves.
Can I give people a hint?
Yeah, go ahead.
He's now at SSM.
Well,
He's now a lobbyist, right?
No. Well, that was a long time ago. That was Justin Alferman. But I'm thinking of Tim Jones. Tim Jones used to come in on Brian Nieves' show.
Oh, nice.
He was like a guest. He was like a guest. He'd just show up every once in a while. It was funny. We talked about, we had the open door policy. Literally, the door of the radio station was open, and people would really, literally come into the radio station, sit down across the desk from Brian, and get on the air. And that was one of the things. And Tim Jones was one of those guys. But there's a side of the politicians to me, it's like, okay, whatever. Now, there's some guys, I have a lot of respect for Steve Ellman, who is the county executive, St. Charles County. Mm-hmm. I think he's one of these guys that really does care, and he's in a position in his life right now where he's already announced this is his last term. He's I think in his early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. He's already announced he's not going to run for re-election. He's up in 2026, I guess it is. It's hard to believe. I was thinking about that for a minute here.
And probably a good decision for him not to run for re-election.
Right, he's done a great job with the county. A lot of people, the whole county council. Let's face it, St. Charles County is the place to be now. I know people are going to say, I can't believe he said that. But
it absolutely is.
Well,
it absolutely is.
It sure as hell beats the city of St. Louis, right?
Also, let's, excuse me, real briefly, though, let's talk about this because the Republican Party that Steve Ellman ascended into in the 1990s is a much different party than the Republican Party today.
Oh, there's no doubt about that.
And the political climate is way different today.
Right. But the interesting part of it is, and let's say the planets align to make St. Charles County it is what it is today, because I've always told the story. When I moved into St. Charles County back in 1984, my boss, Ron Grubbs, who was a West County snob, I was on the air one day working at the old KSOQ / KY98. He's the one that rebranded us as KY, the jelly station. But anyway, he walked in the studio one day and he says, "Hey, Brad, I hear you're moving to St. Charles County." And I said, "Yeah, Ron." He says, "Are you buying a single wide or a double wide?" So
classist, right. Very classist of him.
Well, that's like, he used to always talk about the fact that if his salespeople were going on sales calls in Fenton, they had to wear a leisure suit with a white belt and white shoes. That was Ron Grubbs. But now, once upon a time in Fenton, that was true, but not that case anymore. Fenton's got some very, very, very nice houses. There's a very expensive area in Fenton.
But Brad, let's go back to the idea of, you deal with political people a lot. Here's my thesis. even though you've dealt with political people for, your entire radio career for 50 years, I think I would make the argument that your expectations for public officials and particularly politicians in 2024 are way too high. I think your standards are way too high. And I don't say that's not a backhanded compliment. That's not a compliment or an insult. I think that you come from an era where you expect elected officials to have some kind of sense of greater purpose and to put the public good ahead of Facebook and Twitter likes. And I would make the argument that that is wildly unrealistic.
Well, I guess. I mean, to me, it's like, who do you want? The sad part of it is, and exactly what you said, there's so much gotcha stuff going on with Facebook and Twitter nowadays, to the point where the really good people, I shouldn't say the really good people, but a lot of the really good people would say, hey, why don't you run for office? Not doing that,
Absolutely.
not having...
The argument I make too, and for our Democratic friends, I think this is a challenge that they face. If you are let's say you're a young progressive attorney, and you're a white male progressive attorney, let's say, so just suspend disbelief here, Brad. Or just a young female attorney, and you're in St. Louis County, and you're kind of thinking of running for office because there's an open state rep seat. Do you want to go through 18 months of a campaign where you have to win a primary, where you have to get on the phone and humble yourself and beg people for contributions so that 5 months out of a year you can drive to Jefferson City and make peanuts and have people misrepresent every word you say? Or you can keep earning the salary you're earning and spend every night in bed and not deal with people taking shots at you on Facebook?
Well,
it's not even close.
Yeah,
now, the argument that you would make to a Republican is, hey, don't you want to come serve in the supermajority? It's a lot of fun. We do a lot of cool stuff. People want to talk to you. But if you're a Democrat, how do you recruit a Democrat to put themselves through that?
Well, you tell them you're going to be working with Cori Bush.
Absolutely. Did you see what I sent you, Brad?
Yes, unbelievable.
It's fantastic. Maybe we should talk about that.
Let's talk about it next break. She's once again calling for reparations for black people.
Hey, Brad, and this is my opportunity to point out that I am 1% Senegalese. So I don't know how you can make an argument that I don't deserve reparations.
Once again, I had this conversation with someone yesterday who said something that sort of bothered me.
And was it me?
No, it wasn't you, but I won't say who it was. But I said to this person, I said, you have to look forward, not backward. And the idea being that all of us in our lives have things we've been discriminated against. I mean, once again, I mean, I don't care. I mean, like, for example, it's funny. I told this story the other day. When I was a kid growing up in North County, I worked at Steak and Shake, okay? I was a curb boy, and I worked 3 nights a week, okay? And on the 2 weeknights I worked, we got off at 1 o'clock. By the time we swept up the lot and checked out, it was 1:30, 1:45, okay? I'm driving home through Florissant and unincorporated North County, at 2 o'clock in the morning. And there were weeks when if I worked 3 days a week, I got pulled over 3 times. I got pulled over.
Because you shouldn't be out that late?
Right. Once again, especially if you know the whole crazy story in Florissant, when they put I don't know if you know this crazy story, when they put the White Castle in Florissant right there at, what is that, Lindbergh, and I don't know, what is that, Malamphy or something like that. I can't remember the cross street there. It's in front of that shopping center. When they put the White Castle there, Mayor, who was the guy, Mayor Egan,
oh, wow.
essentially declared that the White Castle could not be there unless they closed from 2 till 6 o'clock in the morning. It was the only White Castle in the country that closed. And what was the reason for that? Because Mayor Egan declared that there's no reason for anybody to be out in the streets between 2 and 6 o'clock in the morning.
That's none, right, which ignores people that work late like
right,
you.
None whatsoever. Yep. If you're out at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're up
nothing
to no
good. Nothing good can happen after midnight.
So they talk about driving while black. To me, it was driving while teenager.
Driving while a young man, and you probably weren't driving a Mercedes-Benz.
I was driving my 62 Pontiac station wagon, and here's a perfect example. One night, I get pulled over by a Florissant cop, and this is actually probably one of my funniest stories. And he's just grilling me. What are you doing? What are you doing out so late? What, are you in high school? Yes, I go to Hazelwood. What are you doing out? It's 2 o'clock in the morning. It's a weeknight. I'm coming home from work. Where do you work? I work at Steak and Shake. I had a Steak and Shake uniform on. I got my Steak and Shake uniform. He says, you could buy those at the thrift store. You don't have to work a Steak and Shake to work. I go, but you should know that I do work at Steak and Shake. And he says, why should I know? And I said, because 2 hours ago you came in and I got you coffee.
No way.
I swear
That's great.
It was, and he looked at me and he goes, oh, I do remember you. Get on your way. So, and it's crazy as it may sound, my dad was an interesting guy. My dad was at the time, when I was in high school, my dad was still in the Army Reserve. And my dad gave me an ammo can that was turned into a first aid kit. And he says, put this in your car. You need it someday. I would get pulled over by the police. They would go through my first aid kit.
Yeah.
They go like, what's in here?
I mean, you look kind of suspicious, Brad.
Well, I mean, the one cop said, what's a kid doing with a first aid kit? And I go, well, if you know my history, I may have to use it on myself. You know what I mean? I may have to put the tourniquet on my arm when I cut my finger off or something like that.
Well, yeah, knowing how you operate. But also,
Right.
None of this correctly refutes the notion that if somebody's ancestors were slaves 160 years ago, you should pay for that, Brad.
Well, but
I don't know why you haven't apologized yet.
My dad.
We're still waiting. As a member of the Senegalese community, I'm still waiting for your apology.
My dad is my grandfather is an illegal immigrant. My father is first
He's
generation.
undocumented, Brad.
Right,
Use the right
excuse me.
terminology.
My father is first generation American. On my father's side, I'm second generation American. So I wasn't here when slavery was around. Neither was
you're still responsible.
my dad or my grandfather. My grandfather was in Russia. He had nothing to do with the slaves. You know what I'm saying?
What privilege you come from,
Yeah,
Brad?
right,
like you're
right.
really exercising your German privilege here.
Right, there you go. Okay, we have to take a break at 7:41.